Hiya. Looks like I'm live having couple of technical hiccups, um, but looks like I'm up and running now. So welcome. For those who haven't watched one of these before or who don't know who I am, I'm Yoni Ejo, and I'm a social worker and an adopter, and I'm also an adopted person. And I wanted to talk to you today about social work and working with social workers or caseworkers, as I believe they're called in the States. I know a number of people in the group are from the States. Um, so before I kick off, just wanted to say if you are watching this live or on the replay, it would be great to know where you're from. If you're an adopter or a foster carer, just put it in the chat. That will be so cool. And also, if you want to you're finding these sessions helpful, or if you're getting something out of the group, I would love you to share or invite the group. Somebody to the group if they're a foster carer or an adopter or somebody who's thinking about it, or who's got a particular professional or personal interest in adoption and fostering. Um, okay, so I'm worked with children in care and foster carers and adopters for probably 3 decades or more now. And what I thought would be really helpful is to give you a bit of a sense more of why sometimes the relationship between foster carers or adopters and social workers can be a little bit um, of a challenge to negotiate, I guess. And so to give you a bit more of a understanding of what their pressures are, that's not to give them a free pass. I know sometimes workers can be quite a challenge, and maybe don't fully understand the implications of being an adopter or a foster carer. Um, and if you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat, either when I'm live or afterwards if you watch it. Happy to answer questions later on if you just put them in the chat and I'll come back to you. So, all of my experiences, obviously, in the UK. Well, not obviously, but that is where it is. And I know some of these issues will be the same in other countries, other systems, and I would love to speak to or hear about the experiences of carers in other countries, just to see how different it is, how similar, and what your thoughts are really. So under regulations and legislation, there's a lot of rules and expectations on social workers and how they work with children. And I'm going to concentrate on children who have been removed, who are therefore in either foster care or being placed for adoption, or in the period when they have been placed for adoption prior to adoption order. There's obviously post-adoption order, the involvement of social workers ends in most cases unless you've got an ongoing support package, um, and so you're pretty much can decide these sorts of things and the contacts. Um, so social workers are expected to visit within 1 week of a child being placed in a new placement, and every 6 weeks in the first year of them being in that placement. So that is relating to whatever placement they move into, be that residential or fostering or adoption. And after the first year, um, young people or children only are visited once every 3 months. And I think that's one of the things that is quite a challenge because that's not very frequent. That's not to say, as a carer, you can't request a more frequent visit if or if you've got dealing with a particular issue, asking for some contact from the social worker or caseworker, um, because there are things that you want to talk about. I think one of the really important things to ask at the beginning is to really clarify what decisions that you as a carer can make, or and what decisions are going to be made by the social worker or need to be referred back to the social worker. And that can be different depending on the age of the child, depending on how long they've been placed, and also to some extent, depending on the individual views of the social worker and of the local authority. Um, so it's important to sort of check things out, but also to challenge if you feel like having to go back to social workers for certain decisions is sort of impeding the experience of the child. So, for example, I think there's a lot of times children stay with other friends, maybe have a sleepover, and more local authorities are realizing that actually they don't need to do criminal record checks or police checks for those households, that they actually just need to due to trust the carer to and ensure that the carer has made some efforts to identify who the people would be in that household, and to sort of normalize young people's experience of care. Um, but that isn't universal, so it's worth those sorts of things being checked out. When children and young people, babies, are in temporary situations, then they are um, scrutinised more frequently. And that's obviously right and proper. And when they're subject to court orders, um, then they do have more contact with social workers. And some of those visits will be unannounced. And I think I've certainly worked with some foster carers who struggle with the unannounced visits, because they inevitably come at a time when the family's really busy and it's not really hugely convenient, but it is part of the regulations. So it's not because the social worker doesn't trust a carer or adopter. It's because it's one of the expectations to do, and it's gives the professional a bit more of a sense about what's day-to-day life. One of the other things that social workers do have a requirement to do is to see the child on their own. Obviously, that depends on the age of the child. It may be that um, if it's a baby, that isn't necessary or appropriate. But in most situations, they will expect to see the child alone when they're verbal. And they would also have a requirement and a guidance to prioritize time with the child over the carer. And that can sometimes be a bit frustrating when you want information and you want to talk about something to do with the child, that is again set down in guidance. And I suppose from my experience, I just wanted to say a little bit about the pressures that social workers are under. That they're juggling a lot of balls, and I think it's a real frustration for foster carers and adopters, new adopters, that they might not see that social worker very often. And unfortunately, um, workers often have quite a lot of different young people to balance the needs of, and to spend parts of their time with, and that can be a real challenge. And in a way, the fact that you don't see the social worker that often is testament to how positively they feel about the placement. But I understand that it doesn't always feel like that, because they will often be managing children in crisis, perhaps who are moving placements, in court proceedings, those sorts of things which are very time limited, and they do have to prioritise. But if you feel like you need some support or some help or some guidance, then it's obviously important that you ask for it and be persistent in asking for it, because I do recognise sometimes it's hard to get hold of social workers. Um, and they're also juggling what is can be quite onerous levels of paperwork. None of that is an excuse, but sometimes it can be if it's helpful to remember the other challenges that they're dealing with, and perhaps not take things too personally because it's not meant personally. Um, some of the things that a worker would address within a visit, they have some really set things to talk about with older children, and obviously age related. They would talk about the child's wishes and feelings. That might be in great depth with older children, or they may have those conversations just trying to tease out in an age appropriate way what the child's wishes and feelings are. Um, they have a legal duty to advise, assist, and befriend the child, and to clarify where that child would get support if they were struggling, and to make sure that they have areas of sort of people, friends, you as carers, teachers who they can talk to if they were worried about something. Workers have an expectation to make sure that the child fully understands why they were in care. Now, I'm not sure that that's always that successful. Certainly with older young people that I work with, some of them, a lot of them do know why they were in care, but some of them don't have a complete understanding. And I think human nature is that sometimes we as workers want to protect the child from the reality of their situation or their parent's situation, and that doesn't, in the long term, do those young people any favors, really. So it is a requirement, and as a carer and as an adopter, I think it's really important that you have the information about why they came into care, even if at that time is not appropriate to share with the child because of their age. And if you don't feel like you're getting the level of information that you're going to need in the long term, then do keep asking for it and keep asking for it until you do feel like you've got enough. Um, and I will talk about complaining in a minute. Also, social workers have to ensure that they promote and build a positive and effective relationship between them and the child or young person, um, and act as a link between the child's history and the birth family. Um, and I know that can sometimes for in I've spoken to foster carers who feel really like the social workers prioritising the birth family and the birth family's wishes, and it is a difficult balance. Um, but as I see it, and I've always seen it, the carer, be the foster carer or the adopter, is the advocate for the child, and so sometimes it's your job to be a thorn in the side of the professionals until you get what you perceive is right for the child. However, there are some situations where perhaps you don't have all the full information, and it's not something a sort of battle that you're going to win. But at least we have a responsibility as professionals to let carers know why if it's not appropriate. Social workers have to identify how the child spends their time, any holidays and leisure times, how they are recognizing and celebrating their cultural, religious, or heritage background, and they will um, want to talk to you as carers about how you're doing that, how you're promoting that, and how you intend to do that in the future. Um, they would observe the child with you as a carer, as a foster carer, because that tells them a lot about the relationship, about how you communicate with each other, and to monitor the standards of care that the young person or the child is subject to. Um, they're also need to identify whether the child has appropriate clothes, toys, food, what contact arrangements and how they're working, and any changes that need to happen. Um, they also do have a duty to look at child's sleeping arrangements and how that works, and that might be also anticipating changing sleeping arrangements as the child gets older, and to identify where additional support is needed. And that's a good opportunity for you, really. If you feel like there is additional support that's necessary, that's going to be beneficial for the child, then it's a good opportunity for you to talk to the social worker. And what I think is really helpful is if you've done a bit of background. If you, the more you can, human nature, the more you can make the life of the social worker easier, in arguing what you want, the more likely it is you're going to be successful in getting it. So, for example, if you feel that the child needs um, perhaps some therapeutic involvement, then it's helpful to perhaps do a diary, identify what behaviours you're concerned about, um, make contact with other professionals that might be working with the child, um, to put a case together without. So I absolutely acknowledge there's a bit of a difficult balance. The social worker also needs to evaluate how much the child living with you is meeting the care plan needs and whether they remain appropriate. Um, and to carry out specific tasks, for example, if the child needs a passport, or obviously for adopters, the whole process of having been matched, of doing the evidential information for the court and going to court to confirm the match. And um, also, for older children, social workers have to ensure that there is some work being done about independent skills. And obviously, I probably would be, because you may know that I'm working in a leaving care team, and it's very evident to me that there are a lot of children or young people who've come out of the care system at 18 who don't really know very much. Now, I know that's not unusual, and I know kids who live with birth parents quite often don't know very much about living independently. But I think it's so important for our children, be they fostered or adopted, to understand how to pay bills, how to sort of be an appropriate neighbour, um, how to cook for themselves, all of those skills, how to do laundry, um, how to negotiate with maybe the gas company or whoever, um, because those are the sorts of skills that are really essential, um, when they are living independently, and hopefully with your support. But it's still quite a steep learning curve. So the more that you can prepare them, the better. Social workers also need to identify, make sure that the young person understands complaints and is monitored in terms of their health, their well-being, any disability issues or complex needs that they have, um, and that you as a carer has the sufficient um, equipment to care for the child appropriately if they've had disabilities and they need a hoist or a bath chair or anything like that, and ensuring that there's a good administration of any medication if that's relevant. So you can see that there are some really um, complex conversations to be had with your social worker, and that's why they're asking the questions that they're asking. However, if there are situations where carers are struggling with a particular social worker, perhaps you're not seeing eye to eye, they aren't visiting, you've got some concerns, then I think it's perfectly valid and relevant to first of all try and manage it with the social worker on their own. If that's not manageable and that's not happening, then talk to the social worker's manager and ask for a visit or a meeting if need be, and just be clear about what it is that you're looking to achieve, and recognise that obviously the social worker's responsibility is to the child and to support you for the best interest of the child. And sometimes those needs can conflict, but if you're able to articulate and argue your case, then they will listen, and they have there is an expectation that they listen to carers as well as listening to children. So I think I've talked quite a long time. I hope that's been helpful. Um, I'd really love to hear your thoughts about how relationships with social workers have been good, any challenges or struggles that you've had, and just put them in the chat if you have the time. So it'd be lovely to hear from you, and I hope you found it useful, and I'll speak to you again. Take care.